Okay, brilliant. Hi, everyone. It is 5 o'clock, so we will get started. And I will pass you straight over to Anna. Welcome, Anna.
Right, hello there. And hopefully, can you see my slides now, or have I lost them?
We can see them, yeah.
You can see them. Brilliant. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Oh, yes. So the title of my talk: Why are some ideas easy to believe on little evidence? And this was taken from a book chapter. So yeah, reference down the bottom if you're interested. The basic premise is that we tend to believe in concepts and claims for which there is insufficient evidence. And we all do it. We all have the things that we believe that aren't entirely rational, but they can be very strongly held. And what I'm going to be focusing on is the social and emotional reasons for entertaining beliefs for which we don't have good evidence. A lot of people have looked at things like analytical versus intuitive reasoning and failures of rational thinking and analytical thinking as explanations for irrational beliefs. But I'm going to be focusing on the social and emotional reasons, which are also very interesting. So we're holding beliefs not because they fit into a rational worldview, and it's not that we positively welcome irrational beliefs, it's just that their rationality is irrelevant. That's not why we hold the beliefs. We hold them for other reasons. There are different kinds of belief for which we lack evidence. The flat earth, which has relatively few adherents, but those can be very passionate about it, but that's a very small scale belief. Ghosts, not small scale at all. Surveys tend to find that between a third and half the population claim to have some level of belief in ghosts, although much smaller numbers claim to have actually seen a ghost. But this is a mainstream belief, all based on anecdotal evidence. There's no systematic study into the existence of ghosts, or very little. And finally, we've got the alternative therapies, some of which have been well researched, some of which have genuine benefit, many of which have not. Sometimes there is evidence, but it's not strong. It depends on small samples and uncontrolled procedures. And attempts to replicate using larger samples and well-controlled procedures are unsuccessful. But there are an awful lot of these around. So 3 different kinds of belief for which we don't have good and sufficient evidence. If you ask a philosopher what is knowledge, you'll get a very long discussion, but in a nutshell, it could be said that we have knowledge when A, something is true, and B, we believe it. If we believe something but it's not true, we couldn't really call it knowledge. And if something is true but we reject it, again, we do not have knowledge. It's the third point that's a bit more interesting, and that says we have good reasons for believing that it's true. Something could be true and we could believe it. But if we have no reason to believe it, that would qualify as a lucky guess. We need to have good reasons for believing that it's true. And the difficulty, of course, is that people disagree on what constitutes a good reason for believing something. They disagree on who's an expert. They disagree on whether it's necessary to consult an expert. Some people say they believe things because they feel that they're true, because they trust their intuition. They're not looking at evidence. They're not looking at reasoned argument. They're trusting their intuitions. Or they believe something because they trust the person who told them. Which brings us on to the concept of who should we be listening to. We tend to listen to our family and friends more than we listen to experts. And this was investigated by Haran and Shalvi in 2019, who came up with the idea of the implicit honesty premium. It's a premium placed on information from a source we regard as honest. We don't always realize we're doing it. It's implicit, hence the implicit honesty premium. We are more inclined to trust someone if we think they are an honest person, or on this occasion, they are being honest. And it's easier to think of a friend or a family member, someone we know personally, as an honest person than a scientist or an expert who we've never met and we don't know. Scientists in particular can come across as, or they have a reputation for being cold and distant and too analytical and not empathic enough. So there are people who would much rather take the word of a completely unqualified person they know rather than consult an expert. And what this study found is that people they prefer to go with their guts. They prefer to trust private individuals more than publicly available information. Even if you ask people, you can consult an expert and they're 70% to be right, or you can go with a private individual who's just guessing. People would still rather consult a private individual, strange but true, even knowing publicly available information is likely to be more accurate. Why? We are swayed by people to whom we feel close. If we have a relationship with them, an emotional bond with them, we're inclined to trust them, even when we're asking them for information where they have no claim to expertise and there's really no reason to do them. And indeed, they should probably refrain from answering. We still like to ask someone we trust. And we hold attitudes for which we have been rewarded, and we get rewarded for agreeing with other people. If we publicly agree with someone, they reward us with their approving responses. So over time, we will come to express opinions that we know people will agree with and accept. And to a large extent, that's just polite. If you're meeting a friend for coffee, it's a better idea to chat about something you know you agree with than something you know you don't agree with. The danger, of course, is that we're restricted in expressing opinions we don't think will be well received. And we come to express opinions that we think will be well received. We may come to internalize those opinions if there's something that it's difficult to say. Which brings us on to the topic of the false consensus. This was investigated by Ross and colleagues back in 1977. And what this says is that our estimation of the popularity of our own choices and our own beliefs is higher than the estimation given by someone with a different view, i.e., we believe other people agree with us more than they actually do. If I have a particular view, I might say I think 60% of the population agrees with me. You have an opposing view, and you might say 60% of the population agree with you. We both think that our own views have more agreement than they in fact do. And this, of course, helps to strengthen our beliefs. How are we able to sustain the idea of this false consensus? Various ideas. One is biased recall. The stronger our attitude, the more firmly wedded we are to our attitude, the more likely we are to remember the occasions on which people agreed with us and the people who agreed with us, and the less likely to remember the occasions when somebody disagreed with us. So our recall is biased. Justification, if we can say that a majority of people agree with us, that proves that we're right. And we all want to be right, and this is part of our justification for believing that we're right. There's a motivation to justify our own beliefs by pointing out how many other people agree with us. And finally, we tend to surround ourselves with people who think like us. In our voluntary social groups, the people we particularly choose to associate with, given the choice, we will prefer to surround ourselves with people who think like us. When it comes to important concepts and values, of course, we can disagree about many things, but it's easier to get on with someone if you agree on fundamental values, things that are really important to you. So these are all ways in which we can sustain a false consensus. And of course, using these techniques to sustain the consensus that people agree with us enables us to cling to a belief that may not be independently justified. Another issue, of course, is distrust in institutions. And we've been hearing a lot about that recently. People don't trust experts, don't trust government. Okay, to an extent that may be reasonable, but people are losing a level of trust in institutions. Now, this isn't always a bad thing. We should hold institutions to account. We should make them justify themselves. We shouldn't let them get away with murder. But at the same time, a society in which those people who really do know what they're talking about, and I'm including librarians and academics there, do have some claim to be listened to, and not everybody should be mistrusted. But we're losing our level of trust in institutions. A YouGov poll, and this was 11,500 people, 8 European countries and the USA. Incidentally, all my references are at the end of my slide, so you can look them all up if you like. This was a large study by anybody's standards. 77% said they distrusted journalists all or some of the time. 76% distrusted governments. 74% distrusted company CEOs. The good news, 64%, this was in the UK, still trust academics. It's lower in the USA, only 57% trust academics. And this does lie behind a lot of conspiracy thinking. Kim and Kim in 2021, trust in government was negatively related to conspiracy beliefs. A lot of popular conspiracies now posit that governments are systematically lying to us. The COVID conspiracies, that was always it was a false threat. There's either no such thing as COVID, or there is such a thing as COVID, but the vaccinations are only there so the government can insert a chip under your skin so that they can track you. Climate change is a conspiracy. There's no such thing as climate change, but it's being used to subvert your liberties. You're going to be prevented from using your cars. You're not going to be allowed to fly abroad. All sorts of liberties will be taken away from you under the false threat of climate change. So these various threats, they're not real. They've just been introduced to control the population and reduce individual liberties. And there, as I said, there's an association between distrusting the government and conspiratorial thinking, especially on COVID conspiracies. The danger is that this tends to erode what we might call the social contract, the contract in which we trust each other within society. Different groups in society trust other groups. We trust institutions and experts. If that erodes, then we don't trust the institutions, we don't trust each other. We become less pro-social, less altruistic. There's more conflict between groups, less mingling within groups, less pro-social altruism, less volunteering, and increased polarization. And none of these are good for social cohesion. So distrust generally erodes what you might call the social contract. It's not a good thing. I may be going too fast. Are there any questions so far?
No, not so far.
Good-o. Okay, I shall continue then. So it's interesting to look at what types of belief are particularly resistant to change. Beliefs are often divided into two camps, which can be described slightly differently. But on the one hand, there's the emotional and intuitive thinking and types of belief. And on the other hand, there's rational analytical thinking and rational belief. These normally work together. Our thinking is coloured by our emotion, and it's right that it should be. Emotion helps us to think rationally, and reason helps us to control our emotions. These normally work very well together, but sometimes one will dominate. There are beliefs that fill or should fill rational functions, and those are beliefs where we should look at the evidence and come to a reasoned decision, fact-based beliefs. And there are some beliefs that fulfill purely emotional functions, religion being one. In principle, when we encounter new knowledge, we should, if we're being rational, consider it alongside our existing body of beliefs, and if necessary, be prepared to modify our existing body of beliefs. And we find for rational beliefs, this is true. If you hold a belief because you've looked at evidence and found it good, and you've considered reasoned arguments based on that evidence to formulate your belief, we could say that your beliefs have logical coherence and they have explanatory value. And this facilitates the active consideration and assessment of new information. If you encounter a new piece of information that's relevant to your belief, you're more likely to recognize it as new evidence because you have considered the evidence relevant to your belief. And you're more likely to recognize when this belief needs some change. This new piece of evidence requires some change to your whole belief because it doesn't quite fit the model you've already got. So if a belief is founded on evidence and reasoned argument, you're more likely to be able to recognize when it needs to be changed and change it in the face of new evidence. Emotional beliefs, on the other hand, are less strongly based on evidence and reasoned argument, and they can remain unchanged in the light of new information. If you're thinking about whether or not to get vaccinated against a particular threat, you would sensibly look at the evidence for the level of threat, look at the vaccine, how effective is it, are there any downsides, and make a rational decision. If, on the other hand, you're emotionally opposed to vaccines, you just are fundamentally opposed to vaccination, the evidence in this particular case is not going to sway you because your emotional opposition may be too strong for anything to sway it. So emotional beliefs, less strongly based on empirical data and reasoned argument, can remain unchanged in the light of new information. Emotional versus rational thinking. Question of what happens to new knowledge depends on what function your belief serves for you. Is it an explanatory function or an emotional function? If a belief serves an emotional function, you are unlikely or less likely to change it, to change your belief for reasons of new evidence that comes along. People who believe in religious ideas of creation don't care how many fossils you dig up. They still believe in creation. They're not swayed by new evidence. And this was a very readable and very good paper on this subject, Griffin and Olson, 2001. And we can ask ourselves, why is everyday scientific reasoning so hard to do? It has a lot of payoffs. If we can apply scientific reasoning, we can make all sorts of rational decisions, but it does seem sometimes to be harder to do. And one reason is that when we're presented with information, we don't like statistics, we don't like figures, we prefer personal stories. And a lot of the way information is presented to us is presented in the way of a personal story, personal anecdote, and appeals to our empathy and appeals to our personal experience. I mean, a classic example was the post office Horizon computer system scandal. It was flagged up many, many years ago. Nobody paid much attention to it until that wonderful TV series with Toby Jones, and all of a sudden it went viral and something had to be done because the stories brought it to life and they brought characters to life and they made personal connections, which is fine. Emotion and reason should work together. Of course, is that when a story is using a personal anecdote, It's trying to make a personal connection with you, the reader, and to engage your emotional, intuitive thinking in opposition to your rational thinking. It's appealing to your emotional, intuitive side. And of course, most people don't really understand how to evaluate scientific findings. They don't really get what it means. If you take HRT, for example, your chance of getting breast cancer will double. From what to what? This is really important. Are you doubling from 1 in 10 to 2 in 10, or are you doubling from 1 in a million to 2 in a million? It matters. But you have to understand how to evaluate scientific findings, which is arguably inadequately taught in schools. On the plus side, we can use emotional engagement for positive reasons as well. Emotions can be used to promote good ideas, to engage people with wanting to combat climate change and save the environment. Pre-bunking, that's a very interesting topic. The whole literature on pre-bunking, whether you can actually teach people to think more critically and to examine claims they may come across. And there have been some interesting studies. If you take people and you teach them all about tobacco and how for many, many years the tobacco companies denied any connection with lung cancer, and all the techniques they use to make you believe that smoking's okay, it's not the tobacco that's causing lung cancer, it's perfectly safe. And if you teach people about how this whole campaign played out over decades and then ask them to apply it to climate change, they can, and they get the point. You don't have to spell it out. You're using one example to, if you like, pre-bunk another example, and helping people to spot sleight of hand techniques, the ways of trying to persuade people that climate change isn't really happening. You can help people to spot the techniques that are being used because they've been used before. So we can make everyday scientific reasoning a bit easier, but there's not enough of that taught in schools. How long have we got? We've got a couple of minutes, I think. What happens when we're placed under uncertainty and stress? When we feel stressed, we tend to cling to ideas more strongly. Whatever our core system of belief happens to be, we cling to it more strongly when we get stressed. This has been shown lots and lots of times with religious beliefs. If you stress somebody, they cling to their religion. But it's also been shown for scientific beliefs as well. And this particular study, Farias and colleagues, 2013, they looked at a group of rowers, either in normal training or just before a competition. Same group of people, 2 different times. One was a naturally stressful situation. And in the stressful situation, they clung more strongly to religious or scientific beliefs. They endorsed these beliefs more strongly and they were more central to them. Another study, Whitson and colleagues. When we feel uncertainty, we entertain a higher level of belief in conspiracies. And they did this by manipulating their participants' level of uncertainty. They asked them to think about a time when you felt worry or hope, surprise or fear. And these would manipulate uncertainty. These are uncertain emotions: worry, hope, surprise, and fear. Versus certain emotions, which are anger and happiness. Anger and happiness happen over things that have already happened. Worry, hope, surprise, and fear are about things that might or might not happen. So they manipulated their participants' level of uncertainty. And those who'd been given a sense of lack of control, the uncertain emotions, had a higher level of belief in various conspiracy theories. And the theory here is that making people worry about what's going to happen activates a need to see the world as being very orderly and controlled. And if the world is genuinely not orderly and controlled, well, here's a nice, simple conspiracy theory that tells you exactly what's going on, takes a complex situation, simplifies it for you. Here's something nice and easy you can believe. And it makes the world seem more orderly and more controlled. And in this way, conspiracy beliefs can offer a sense of order and stability. People under uncertainty and stress may value this. This is similar to the idea of dogmatism. Our core beliefs give us certainty and they give us stability. Whatever those beliefs are, religious beliefs or scientific beliefs, they give us certainty and stability.
Anna, there's 5 minutes remaining.
That's 5 remaining. Are there any questions?
There aren't any at the moment, unless someone wants to pop their hand up. Yeah, we've got someone with the hand raised. Kevin, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, Anna, thanks for this. It's really, really fascinating talk. I wondered what you do with the fact, and I think it's quite hard to deny it, is the fact that when people say that, you mentioned at the start that politicians routinely lie to them, they are
Yes.
right. But politicians, I can't think of one who's never been caught lying. So what do we do with the fact that misinformation seems to come from the institutions that we should trust the most, from our prime minister, from other political parties?
Yeah.
Uh, I guess what I'm asking is, the old joke about paranoia. Maybe they're really after you.
Yes.
How do we deal with maybe these institutions don't have your best interests at heart?
Yeah, we have to learn how to make considered judgments. Some of the conspiracy stuff is just, oh please, it's ridiculous, and you can take a step back and tell. Some of the reasons we distrust politicians are probably quite good reasons. They do pull the wool over our eyes. They present information very selectively. They may not very often tell blatant lies, leaving aside Boris Johnson, but they do present information and they don't present all of it. So learning how to assess what they're saying and what they're not saying, learning how to engage in a critical way with what they say, not automatically believing it and not automatically disbelieving it either, but taking a step back and really trying to critically analyze what they're saying, adding a large pinch of salt, a lot of knowledge about, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? You can assess the likely accuracy of what somebody's saying. You don't have to go, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. I think you can take a considered judgment about how far to trust someone. And we shouldn't give our trust implicitly to politicians. We should hold them to account and we should make them justify what they're telling us. But we can do that by engaging with what they're telling us and asking questions rather than simply swallowing it whole or dismissing it whole. I don't know if that helps at all, but more engagement, I think.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. It's been a really interesting talk, and thanks for the answer as well.
Thank you very much.
We do have another question. So what advice do you have for memory-driven institution in terms of misinformation education, either on an individual level, also known as instruction, or collection challenges?
Oh, say that again. That was quite a long. Sorry, that was a long question, and it's been a
Yeah,
long
no
day.
worries. And I think perhaps because you don't work in libraries, I'm not sure necessarily you'll be able to answer this. But what advice do you have for memory-driven institutions in terms of misinformation education, either on an individual level or in our collections?
Right. So memory-driven institutions, are you thinking libraries there?
Libraries, archives, yeah, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, so about memory. What advice do I have for combating misinformation?
Yeah, in terms of misinformation education.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Education. Yeah. Well, basically, a lot of work with people in giving them examples, like the example of what the tobacco industry did, and inviting them to think about other people who are using these sorts of techniques now, which are things like getting some tame scientists on board, manufacturing controversy, saying that, you've got 99% of the world scientists on one side, but we've got 1% on the other side. They have to be given equal time. We have to give them equal platform. We have to take their views equally seriously. It's not a scientific consensus, but some people will say you have to do that. So to try and get across to people, no, look, if 99% of the world's climate scientists agree on something, that really is very likely to be worth listening to, and try and but it can come down to some very simple, basic things like that. But also to recognize why people are holding a belief. And is it based on a fundamental value? Because there are things that people fundamentally value, and if they think you're threatening them, they become quite emotional, and when they become emotional, they're less likely to listen. And an example, a conspiracy theory that came out quite recently, well, not that recently, is the idea of the 15-minute city, which started out as a wonderful idea that everything you need, the essentials of life, should be available within 15 minutes. But some people said, oh, that means the government are going to restrict you and you won't be allowed to travel more than 15 minutes away from where you live. I don't know how you get from one to the other, but this is striking at people's basic freedoms and they get very emotional about it. So just to recognize where there is emotion involved and you have to deal with emotion and meet people where they are and recognize what's worrying them and address that. You can't just, if somebody's emotional, you can't combat that with reason. You have to meet them where they are, understand why they're emotional, and try and appeal to that in a positive way.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We have run out of time for your session. What I will say is, obviously, some people will need to run off now for various reasons. So if you do need to run off, please do. I'm happy to stick around for a couple more minutes after this to keep hosting the session if you want to ask Anna any other questions, if that's okay with you, Anna.
That's fun.
Great. But if not, if you do have to go now, thank you so much for attending today. That is the end of CALC. There is no more sessions after this. There's no more conference end of day to attend. So thank you to everyone that has spoken today, that has attended today, and we will see you tomorrow. We are starting at 12:45 British summertime, so not sure whatever that is in your time zone, but we look forward to seeing you tomorrow for more excellent sessions. But yeah, please join me in thanking Anna. And yeah, if we do have a few more minutes to stick around, happy to stick around for a couple more minutes. But if not, please do feel free to head off. Someone's just asked, Anna, could you just repeat what the first misinformation strategy was, please?
Oh gosh, I can't even remember what I said. We don't really do as much as we might about teaching critical thinking in schools, and it needs to start quite early and quite delicately. Critical thinking is probably the biggest skill that anyone will ever have. Way more important than learning facts is learning how to interpret. We're surrounded by information all of the time. It's learning to sort out what's important and how to assess it, evaluate it, how to interpret it, especially with the use of AI now, which can generate massive amounts of information very quickly. Trouble is, as we know, a lot of it's, well, it tends to be very shallow and a lot of it is even true. So for people to learn how to critically evaluate is becoming even more important. So that's the first thing, and it goes all the way back to schools. I'm sure academics and librarians can play a role in that as well, in gently encouraging people to think, take a step back. Is it really reasonable? I mean, do you honestly think the government is going to prevent you from travelling more than 15 minutes away from where you live, given that most people work further than that? Are we all going to just quit work at the same time? Please stop and think about it. This doesn't even work. But people get very excited about ideas like this because it's just a threat and it switches their brain off. So persuading people to rein in the emotion and just engage critically with ideas can go an awfully long way.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to raise their hand for? I don't see any other questions in the chat at the moment.
It was a lovely study that, following on for some surveys that showed that left-leaning liberal voters are more concerned about the environment than right-leaning and conservative voters. And they wondered if they could get Conservatives to care more about the environment if they appealed in the right way. Saving the whales, no. Rising sea levels, not really. But if they said, look, the grass is going to dry up on the village green and you won't be able to play cricket anymore, you engaged people. So it's just engaging with people in the right way, find out what their values are and appeal to those values.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, it
We've
looks
dried up.
like, yeah, but yeah, that was so, so interesting. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank
And I'm
you.
sure everybody here will join me in thanking you again. But yeah, that is the end of today. Thank you so much, Anna.
Good
And
stuff.
yeah, hopefully you can attend some of the rest of the
I
conference.
will try to join you tomorrow.
Great. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very
Good night,
much.
everybody.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks. Bye.